So Headlands Pod is for people that are building businesses or projects, honestly, whatever it is that you're doing as like an expression of themselves.
Yeah. As long as you're like thinking about it and realizing that as you show up in the world, your actions, you're applying yourself has a spiritual bent to it, or there's an awareness to it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're even aware or just waking up to that beginning. That's kind of our belief that doing anything in the world has a spiritual connotation.
And so I like to define spirituality too. What do you mean? What do you say like spiritual bent? What do you mean?
That's a good question. It has implications beyond just the physical atoms that change here.
Okay.
In the sense that there are larger forces of life that may be seen or unseen. There may be an interconnectedness with other people. Mm-hmm. There may be a higher purpose or higher meaning to it. Mm-hmm. And even if you're unconscious of those things or you're not intentionally trying to shift those things, they will interplay together. Mm-hmm. What's your take on it?
I think it is basically a pursuit of meaning.
I like that.
But like rational people also have pursuits of meaning, but they're very kind of concrete.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like for us, it's like a slightly different.
We're not the rational people.
No, we're not. No. It's almost like a higher imagination.
Yeah, I like that. That's a nice way to say that. Wow, I like that.
Yeah, high imagination based pragmatists or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess we are trying to combine like the rational way of existing in the world that we're like kind of trained and brought up with more of this high imagination.
Yeah.
Meaning.
Deeper meaning.
Yeah, deeper meaning, curiosity or hunger that like has happened for us. We could also start with who we are or like why we're talking about this. Okay. Yes.
Who are you, Egor?
Yeah, I'm Egor. I'm a founder who is also waking up to pursue some spiritual study in the last like 3 to 4 years after having tried a lot more rational pursuits like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, coaching, etc. Eventually turning more to spiritual study as well. And I'm currently trying to figure out kind of how those weave together.
Cool. Yeah. Exact same kind of trajectory. Also a founder, and I am using my life as a way to experiment to figure out like, I don't know, more interesting, like fun facts about reality.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah. It's like an astronaut except for the world.
Yeah, exactly. Run a lot of, I think that I like to think that I run experiments
on yourself.
On myself and on reality. Yeah, figuring out.
We should also just talk about some experiments at some point. That's going to be fun.
I'm sure yours are pretty weird too.
Yeah. Maybe less intentional. I think it's also interesting to talk about Headlands Pod, the name, and part of how we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you spurred it with some of the ideation, like what this could be, and a place vibe. I think Headlands was interesting as just like a metaphor where it is something that's at the edge. Mm-hmm. And in the fog, kind of cliffs overlooking the ocean, but still on the land. Mm-hmm. And that felt actually like the vibe I got from us, kind of where we are and what we're trying to do for this podcast to be.
Yeah.
But we still want it to be very anchored in day-to-day, what we're doing in the world. There's things that need to be done here.
Yeah.
But also kind of like at the edge, looking into that imaginative, meaning-based spiritual connotations and like exploring consciousness from that angle and trying to combine the two.
Yeah, for sure. I think totally agree with that. It's like the misty outward perspective of like, can't really see exactly what's ahead, but there are shapes.
Yep.
We're going to try to describe them. We're just little, we're just like fingers pointing at the moon. Okay. So I think the podcast was really a place for us to find like-minded people. So taking more kind of like self-expression related paths, whether you're like building a creative project or a tech company, honestly, it could be anything. And also trying to find time and space to have spiritual pursuits or like have bigger questions of like meaning and like, why are we here? And also specifically, how can we contribute in like more unique ways that are really unique to us, I think. So I think like I personally started this and I think I'd love to hear your motivation is to like find our people.
Find our tribe,
Find our tribe.
Yeah, that resonates a ton, and I think there's a ton of great conversations and the people that we're kind of acquainted with or aware of that we would love to kind of use this as a platform to speak with.
Yeah.
Also, I think for me, I don't know. I think this was as intentional about like this was the reason, but as I think about it now, it's like I think I got really into podcasts during the pandemic, and part of that was like an immediate like cutoff from people that I would see day to day, and there was just like a narrowing of like who I hang around with. And naturally, I'd be going for a walk or exercising or something. I kind of just wanted to hear things. So I would start listening to podcasts and starting to share podcasts with friends. And I think what happened as a result of that is like I would always have this voice in my ear. And I'd be hearing things discussing, be it tech, be it entrepreneurship, be it kind of news, whatever it was in the world. And there's that saying of like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
I realized I was starting to like my worldview and my influence and the way I was interacting in the world was all kind of starting to be affected by what I was listening to. And to some extent, I really wish like the Egor of back then would have a podcast like this to just be like, hey, like you're exploring the world this way, but like you're considering these things and you're kind of poking at them. Here's examples of how other people have done this. Here's what this tribe looks like. Here's like this whole group of people. Here's others you may want to check out. Here's ways you may want to apply this. Not even like intentionally or like explicitly, these are things you have to do, but more of like trying to getting me indirectly aware of these things. I think the past Egor would have really benefited from that.
Yeah.
So to some extent, there's like people out there that may be hearing this that may be in that place.
Yeah.
And it would be great to be able to be of value to them in some way.
Yeah, that's cool. It's almost like, ideally we'll have a bunch of random crazies coming on here who have basically described their way of making their very unique path work. And so it's just like a modeling exercise, which I love.
For sure.
And the main question is just like making it work, which is like a consistent struggle for everyone, right? It's like, are we doing a good job or not? I think like that metric is kind of silly. I think it's just the fact that like there is inquiry and that there's space in my life right now to even be able to think about this stuff.
For sure. That's a huge privilege we have.
Yeah. And I definitely feel the pressure going from like learning and theorizing to like, I don't know, integrating and expressing that is, I think, the work.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard. So for today, I think we have like a bunch of things that we like originally talked about before we started recording that are interesting.
Yeah, we'll have topics, I guess, like every week that we go through and just either something topical in the world or just things that are crossing our place or crossing our mind for whatever reason.
Okay, first question is, do you feel like high functioning people are the least present or actually they're pretty present? Well, okay, presence and high performance.
Okay.
Do you think those are mutually exclusive? Do you think that high performance is actually presence? What is the relationship between those two things?
That's an interesting question. I guess the first thing that came to my mind as you said that is actually like super elite athletics, where people talk about a flow state. Like in basketball, people talk about it. I think swimmers, like sprinters, where you're kind of like in this different state, which I think to me flow maps very well to presence. And you're just super attentive of the current moment to the point where you're like kind of lost in it. And in that case, I do think the highest level of performance is very intertwined with presence.
Yeah.
I think when you start to expand that, and even like thinking of starting again with athletics, they're not in that state all the time.
Yeah.
People have a bad game, people have a bad day, and like they're still, top pinnacle of human performance in that particular discipline, but they may not be very present. If anything, I suspect it's interesting because I do think that what I've heard from at least some few basketball interviews is like when you get caught up in like replaying what just happened, like even on the last play or earlier in the day, that's when you start to really suffer in your performance. So to me, it feels like there should be a correlation. I'm not sure about it in the professional tech world. I guess speaking personally, and then I'd love to kind of hear all your thoughts on both the athletic part and the professional part. I think personally, I've done well in some roles in the past and not been very present. And if anything, that felt kind of performative. But I kind of like understood the game rationally enough to be like, this is how I perform. And I think at the same time, when I look back to some of those roles, the moments where people may have had like where I think I've had the most impact on a person, or where I've like the moments I remember the most, I do think there was something more present and something like more connected for me, where I was showing up as in a more human way beyond just the role that I was executing.
Yeah. So the thesis that I wrote down is that high functioning people can be the least present Maybe it's like I'm trying to create spicy takes.
Okay, hot take.
And I think to your point, it's like if we look back to previous work-related things, one could be very checked out and still be fine or do good at the work because there is some sort of muscle memory around how to perform. And so that like performativeness can actually decrease presence. It's almost like when your muscle memory of knowing how to do something is high enough, then it could even run on autopilot. That doesn't really require that much presence.
That makes sense.
So in some ways, success for what you do can actually deepen the sleep state. Rather than interrupting it.
It's interesting to see sleep state because as you were describing it, that's what was coming to mind for me is like, it's almost like sleepwalking. Is that the message of like, you could get so good at the routine that you're still performing well enough, but you're kind of sleepwalking the role.
Yeah. And so I think with that, like, I don't think that's a problem per se, right? It's like if one's, I think that's the thing I'm like trying to map out some of these concepts in relation to like what is important to me, which is like, so if high functioning people don't really require presence, maybe like to get to high functioning, it requires a lot of presence to like get to that point, but then it's really just kind of autopilot. Then really, so basically presence is like not necessarily needed for high functioning tasks. Potentially.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think there's maybe a point in which it does, how do I put it? Maybe at some point both are required. So one thing that comes to my mind is like, I learned pottery at one point, but I guess painting is maybe an easier example. I think I would make the argument that like a child finger painting might be super present and there's no technique involved.
Yeah.
And then kind of from that point on, someone learning like methodically, this is how I paint, these are the techniques. It's very easy, and I remember as a kid learning for the first time, getting super caught up in the technique. And then my understanding is that at some point you become good enough at the technique that you can be present in the art and actually kind of transcend the technique itself. And I'm wondering if it's kind of something similar here where you have to be high functioning and performant enough to have a certain bar that allows you to be present in that way as well.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. It's almost like if someone's figuring out how to increase more presence in their lives, then there is like some sort of minimal performance that is required in order to like, it's almost like then you have the spaciousness to be present. Although the difference between the finger painting thing and work is that the art in finger painting is that you now have the tools to really like deepen your presence. Except for work, the purpose is to function. Like there is a performative nature there.
Presence is not the goal.
Yeah, presence is not the goal. But I do wonder like with like, you know, like, sorry, there's like maybe an ADD brain thing. But I thought the whole idea of us like creating agent armies is so that we have a bunch of skills that we need to like ramp up to get agents to do the work so that you could like have more presence in your life.
Yeah.
And I wanted, that's like kind of the like thesis. Some people are saying that actually managing the agents actually creates a lot more functioning. It creates a lot more work. So it's like it's like basically, are we creating, sorry, like it's completely sidebar, but like, are we creating swarms of agents to increase more presence in our lives? Is that like kind of the goal? Or are we just like adding more work, more high functioning work that we have to continue to maintain, basically?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I also like, it makes me think of like, there may not be a one size fits all for everybody, and hopefully there's the ability to kind of tune these things to the types of inputs that allow each person to have more presence.
Yeah.
Because one thing that came to my mind is like a super early version of like agents is essentially like role-playing real-time strategy games where essentially you have like some soldiers going somewhere and you're controlling all of them, and like people get absorbed in these games, and in reality they're architecting and coordinating like hundreds, sometimes thousands of things at once. But the way it's delivered for them is partly because it's a video game, it's conducive of more of a flow state, and they're actually like lost in the moment and they're competing with someone or they're really doing it. But realistically, you could see work orchestration getting to a similar point as long as those inputs made sense for those agents, and those inputs still felt like conducive of presence for the person. But you could just as easily see that being steered the other way, and all of a sudden it's a lot more overhead and kind of getting out of flow, if anything.
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty good, like, I think this is a good part. So do you mind if we like recontextualize basically what we talked about, but in a more like kind of like practical thing, which is around agent orchestration.
All right.
Like the design of agent orchestration and how like people that are currently going through that process, it's like probably have some sort of felt sense of how to set it up so that it could increase flow state. So what I do for work is basically build clinical agents. So we take all these medical records, like intake forms, basically like medical documents, and then have to feed them to the agents so that the output assists the doctor to make a diagnosis or whatever. There's different use cases. And the current struggle that I have in building this with the team is the agents have trouble reconciling documentation, making sure it's correct. And then there's like hallucination challenges that we're kind of like currently fixing. And so I would like, the goal of orchestrating all this is so that there is less work for the clinician, so that the output basically already synthesizes the case instead of having someone manually looking at like 50 pages of like medical history. So in that sense, like, I don't know if we can contextualize this in the like, how do we design flow states in agent orchestration, but I'm not really experiencing that much flow state right now in setting up the agents, because there's just hallucinations and errors. And even when we create a new agent to help with the orchestration, like to like LLM as a judge, there's still issues. And so I get, there's like a lot of frustration, and I wonder if I'm still at this point of like developing skill set. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, like,
it's a really good question.
Yeah. So the question really is like, agents are supposed to enable more flow state. I almost like if we went back to like the theory, okay, I think starting with like the finger painting, how like once you learn a certain skill, you can get into a flow state. Orchestration of AI agents can theoretically also a skill to get us into a flow state. But like, what does that look like? And do we have some use cases that showcase that? I think that could be like a really concrete thing around like, how do you add like spiritual principles into like design or whatever. I don't know if you want to.
The principle being of like presence and flow.
Experience more flow, because like I think that's what vibe coding is at its core. But I think it's like I don't know. There's like something in me that's like, oh, we should push into like the more tactile examples.
This is a really good example. Let me try to see what comes up. So as you were first describing it, and then towards the end, two different things came up. So let me try to kind of structure it. First of all, it was like, for the actual user, in your case, the clinician, or the person who would be using the system and agents, it'd be interesting to consider like what gives them flow. What does their day-to-day look like? What are those tasks? How does that break down? Even if you just think about like 100% of the time they have in a day, how much of that is now like being freed up by the agents doing some of this work, which allows them to do something else. And ideally allows them to do that something else in a way that is even more conducive of flow. Perhaps like spend more time with the person, or do some more interesting like pattern observation and research for like, oh, this is maybe an insight here. Whatever it is for that particular person, there's maybe a there there. That makes sense. Separately, there's you and your team actually setting this up for people, which admittedly may just be frustrating work. It's like in pursuit of this great. It just may be like the grind and this is the work. And like, again, that might be different for your team versus for you, because maybe for you, the flow might be about like coordinating this, or like aligning the team, or leading that particular, really understanding the clinician and talking to them and then translating it. There's so many different parts to it. But like bashing at like one agent and just like making it better and iterating of like a sequence of prompts or however it's done, that itself is just, I don't know if that's going to be very fun.
I love that.
Of perform like presence grounding. So those are probably my main two things.
I love that. So basically what we talked about is agent orchestration as a medium to facilitate more flow state for people. And I do think that's like, that is one of the core theses, I think, for people that are currently building different types of architectures. But I think that the process through it is just like, it's hard. And I'm curious for like the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hear about NPC Camp.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah, I want to like understand the ethos behind it, and then and the build. Like, you want to share some experience there.
Oh, good questions. I'll come to a more direct answer around flow state stuff in a little bit, but I'll start with just kind of what I've been doing right now. So I think for me, I kind of looked at holistically, like I saw what was happening with LLMs and early agent work, and I realized like chat is not the final. IDEs or chat inputs are not the final form.
Yeah.
Partly because super simple examples, like I'll type something and then I'll get back like massive paragraphs, and then I'm like caught reading it or skimming it and then already typing the next thing. I'm not in a very present state, and as a result, I'm not as attached to the outputs that are happening. I kind of observed that for myself really quickly. So I realized there's going to be much more variable, flexible UI formats and user experience formats for kind of all this AI stuff that happens. And we're seeing some of that right now where individual startups are tackling one particular user experience for one particular user and just like improving it rapidly. So I've been doing a lot of exploration on what are these different form factors. I spent a lot of time on mobile. At some point, OpenClaw happened, and I've kind of reassessed how my thinking around kind of how that's done. And one of the projects kind of that I was trying to push a little bit at the intersection of user experience and really this idea of like psychographics and personality for agents is NPC Camp, which is this idea of like if essentially we're all having dialogue with these AI agents anyways, and me particularly liking podcasts, it was a pretty simple idea of like, what if we actually have engaging podcasts with AI characters, and who would I want to have in the same room? What would it be like to have Steve Jobs and Snoop Dogg conversing about something, or like huge fan of Pharrell, having Pharrell there kind of discussing how he approaches like the creative part of his work. No substitute for having the real person there, but creating like allowing an almost infinite flexibility in what could be discussed. How well could that be done? And that was kind of an early exploration, early project I've done right now. Obviously, everything's an approximation, but LLMs have been pretty good with the right sequencing of work in creating a psychographic profile for an agent to use, then facilitating that to have a conversation with myself and other agents. And that was kind of the early exploration there. NPC Camp is currently on a wait list, but also had a quick launch over the weekend of a version of this called Dream Blunt Rotation of who would you like to hang out with the most, kind of what would you discuss. And it facilitated that experience that I wanted, and super early like signals of this like from 2 days ago. One thing I noticed that was kind of interesting is a lot of people poked at, can I make these things argue with one another? Which was an interesting thing, that's like one of the first things that speaks up of like something about contention is inherently interesting. I wasn't designing with that in mind, and I'm going to visit that.
Yeah.
But that does start to signal the intent of that. It was like, why am I interested in AI podcasts? So what's the whole point of this user experience stuff? The vision there has been is like, if you have access to something like this, then what does that allow for the person to experience, or how could that act as a mirror for the person? If I have this means to talk to luminary minds on creativity, maybe that's the road that I'm going to go down further, and that'll awaken something within me. And in that process, that could be my presence in flow state. Again, with a UI that's conducive of that and topics that kind of are supportive, to ultimately allow me to go deeper on a vector that's authentic to me and something that I care about. So that was kind of from a very jovial, jokey place to kind of a much more holistic human vision. That's what the point of NPC Camp was.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for describing that. You know, the one thing that came up for me very strongly as you were describing this is I realized that there are really different motivations for why people build things now. And I think that like the medium of AI has basically increased the different it basically enabled different types of motivations to exist. I think in the past, like because software was kind of static and there's very little, basically we're very limited by the tooling, that like almost like you're either doing something for business reasons, like it's kind of hard to do self-discovery work or like inner work through technology. And like the thing that came up very clearly for me as you were describing NPC Camp is that it's actually a form for you to discover flow state and like deeper values that are embedded in you. So it kind of goes back to like the essence of the podcast, which is looking for people
Right.
who are building things as a way to deepen their relationship with themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so based on that, any like initial finds about what you're learning about yourself?
Great question. I think one thing I'm realizing is just like that technology can be a brush in a way, the same way that like art or painting or whatever it is might be a brush for that kind of creative expression. And I think I'm realizing for myself, I care a lot more about this kind of like human self-exploration and meaning than just technology as a means to an end. And I'm very much continuing to be drawn back to how can technology be applied to this. And with AI, maybe it's possible for the first time ever. That's kind of the main realization, I think, of just like how to apply my work there. The other point is interesting. It's just like even with NPC Camp, like I was always more drawn to like the Snoop Dogg and the artists, and then like Steve Jobs, to some extent like Cleopatra. There's much more like funny characters on there. Like SpongeBob, Shrek, there's just like a variety of stuff. I think I definitely have like this creative, expressive take. And there's something I'm finding for myself about the intersection of creativity and let's say self-understanding and spiritual pursuits that I'm very much trying to weave.
Yeah.
And if anything, like these experiences are being a canvas for me to continue to go deeper in that realm.
Yeah. Why do you think that people were really into the agents like fighting themselves or like getting argumentative?
I'd love to hear your take on this. I was a little surprised at first, but I think it was like, I guess the thing that comes to mind is actually similar to what first happened with Sora. So when Sora came out, it was like you could generate a video of anything. And on Instagram, on TikTok, and YouTube, there is a certain like meta game of what content is created and what content does well. On Sora, that meta game very quickly became humor, partly because like when anything is possible and things can be nonsensical, like why, like what do you really care about? And humor seemed to be like a common denominator and I think people are realizing like humor's like a pretty core human thing that we could rally around.
Yeah.
I suspect something similar might be happening here where like, you know, you could talk to these things about anything. It's truly infinite. There is something trained about us right now that like AI can be funny, and AI arguing with each other in kind of nonsensical ways could be very funny. And I think that was like one of the first ways people already have a view of using AI for value.
Yeah.
And like humor is like a pretty clear one that comes to mind. I don't think there's been as much examples or like applied principles of like how can AI be used for self-exploration or like something along those lines. We know ChatGPT or Claude Code, there's like productivity applications from all these things. In specific workflows, there's specific tools we know AI can do well for. Even for like podcasting and editing, there's tools there. But when it's kind of an empty sandbox with characters involved, I think humor may be the first thing that people are already thinking about.
Yeah. I feel like when I saw your landing page and I was like listening to like the voices, I can totally see that. I mean, like, I don't know, voice is just like such a like visceral output that I can see, like, and it's also the people you picked are funny. Like Snoop Dogg and SpongeBob are funny. So it's just like what happens if they're talking to each other. It's almost like, it's like entertainment, really. And podcast is a form of entertainment too. So I could totally see that.
Yeah, but I think specifically within that entertainment, there's many ways to be entertaining, but contention and argument was like the one that we're drawn to.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that itself was kind of cool. Maybe there's something about that like we don't want it to be like everyone getting along.
Yeah.
Like, maybe like stakes. Like people care about stakes. Like a good story has stakes and drama.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's almost like emergent storytelling and emergent like experiences are possible with like human plus AI co-creation now.
Yeah, I think the emergence thing is interesting because I feel like the musicians who are also kind of like experimenting are also just like, one is just like the shock and awe, first of all, of just like, oh, AI can now make this thing, it's not shitty. I mean, a lot of it is still shitty, but like, you know, there's some of it's just like indistinguishable. And then like once you're over the shock and awe, and then it's just like, well, what's emergent here? Like what are new possibilities and combinations, or like even like, yeah, like different possibilities that we didn't even think about. And I think that's really cool. I just like, yeah, I would that's music is probably what I would be exploring if, you know, I'm not doing like whatever, all the things I'm doing right now.
Yeah, music's super cool. I thought about music a little bit, and Google's done some really interesting work there where they released Lyria 3. I don't think it's out via the API yet, but it is in their in Gemini, and you can kind of try it out. But it's essentially real-time music generation. So for the first time, you can kind of like steer it pretty immediately as opposed to just a prompt and then you have an output.
Oh, interesting.
And that's I think that gets closer to this idea of like art is happening in the moment and it's expressive.
Yeah.
That was one of my biggest critiques about creative AI in the past of like, if I put in an input and then I get an output, that skips the entire journey.
Yeah.
And the journey is where the art really happens, where you have that felt connection of like, this brushstroke was the wrong way, but that actually feels right this way. Or like something's coming up in my mind and I'm trying to like convey that onto the canvas or express it in the song.
Yeah.
And I think like the real-time creative AI is going to be really powerful for people.
Yeah. I actually I think like this reminds me of like your note about the interface for interacting with AI is really limited at the moment. Like I think chat has been really great from like a conversational like turn-taking approach, which is probably relevant for, I don't know, general inquiries, but creativity, like you said, isn't in this like massive prompt or like turn taking where like someone gives you a final product and then you have to tweak it. I think for the medical field, there's like also a slightly different cadence where, you know, when like for diagnosis is like, at least I can talk about that, is like when someone comes in with like, I don't know if I have ADHD or some other diagnosis, like if you're meeting someone in person or like over Zoom, the doctor already makes the case conceptualization based on a bunch of like very quick intake questions. And then they give you really long labs to verify their thesis. So like the process of building AI that supports that decision is actually having the person like do the intake and then like give them a couple of hypotheses and they would pick that before we generate a bunch of those outputs, because it actually just most mimics like the way that case conceptualization is done today. So I feel like there's like tons of opportunity or alpha for like designing AI that most mimic how people do thinking or decision making or like whatever cognitive process that we're doing right now. So I think I agree with you. There's like tons of opportunity or like possibilities there.
And I think it's super interesting if you can go really deep on that particular user group and that particular experience. You can go beyond designing just the AI itself, but also designing like the tools they use and the experiences around it and how kind of having those go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of talk with like coding the harness, like a cloud code that you're using to run the underlying LLMs could be so intertwined and so like well designed for one another.
Yeah.
But that hasn't really permeated through the industry for all these other places. So imagining that for doctors, imagining that for like clinical assessments, maybe it's a completely different experience that we're not used to today, but is A, much more effective, and B, much more conducive of like whatever the human superpower is in that particular field.
Yeah.
And I think that would be phenomenal. Like I would love that in the world.
Yeah. I mean, can you talk more about like how the coding, harnessing, and everything has like proliferated from there? Like if you walk through the the process of how that happened, I wonder, like, I don't know if it's like a one-to-one mirroring to everything else, because like code is obviously like so intrinsic. It's almost like there's a little bit of a recursive nature, like computer science, of course, can like refactor pretty quickly. But for the other fields, I wonder, like, is it going to be as easy, you know?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to even try to sound like an authority on the space.
I'm
not by any means. I think, like, my understanding from what was super powerful is, like, first of all, like a model running in a loop is already a really interesting start, because it's like, okay, I can reason, I can do a lot of things if you just keep going. The other part was like essentially with coding, the tools that a person who writes code, a developer, a programmer, uses are primarily around language, writing code, searching language, reformatting, restructuring it in various ways, looking for answers online, whatever it would be. Those tools, it was a very interesting combination where they were able to kind of understand what a software engineer or developer does and create those tools in very simple ways to use for the AI agent in that case. And that combination essentially meant that you have most of the capabilities that a human software engineer could do with the reasoning of a model. And as the models get better, that pattern compounds quite quickly. And I think that's where we saw like a ton of success with the early coding agents. Plus, I think very importantly, and this is where like people much more technical than I, there's a ton of training data. We know how good code is written. We may even have Git history of like from the version 1 to the very end, how that's happened and how this looks in different languages, etc., which meant you could train on that really well. Mapping that to something like a clinical workflow, that feels a lot harder partly of like what are the tools to be done there, and what are the user experiences, what are people doing today, and then two, like, do we have a sense of like what good actually looks like or not? I think one, just because I did a little digging into gaming, it's a very interesting example where technically making games is like not that different from making code, but there's already not the same amount of data of just like the permutations of what can happen in a game state and like how that's all organized. That's not nearly as well codified, so it's much harder to train there.
Yeah.
And that's, again, pretty close to like the realm of software. Yeah. Going all the way to like clinical and human-based things, I think that's where it's like really tricky.
Yeah. Well, going back to the gaming analogy, do you feel like the eval of what a good game is clear?
Great question. No, I don't think so. Because I think that is more felt human experience. But I do think there's some studies and fields of like trying to codify like what game design is and like what game juice is, which is essentially like what are like the sounds and visuals that happen in response to some of the things you do to feel good and stimulating. To some extent, like that's been applied to things like feed algorithms as well. So I think there's some study of that. But can LLMs or can AI agents deliver feeling? Like that's TBD.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I'm generally very bullish, even for those like other industries that don't have nearly as much data or like eval criteria has been cemented. I actually think like for each industry, there's like probably the same inputs. So for like the clinical example, for example, like, I mean, like the first thing we did is just try to partner with as many hospitals to get inputs, mostly from like gold standard ones, like we partnered with Harvard or whatever. And the second thing is like the eval criteria is, are we working with like experts in the field who it's like, it is a felt sense of the taste thing, right? So it's like, I wonder if the proliferation of agents into the world are going to come from picking the specialists of each field for the eval criteria, which I think like, but I think like companies like Merck or whatever is like already going upstream to like the specialists for like chemical engineering to like PhDs of any field and being like, hey, if you like basically do labeling for us, we'll give you good money to get more. Yeah, the pre-training data is like far and few between compared to coding, but I do think that might actually be the approach to proliferate this philosophy to like all the other industries. Yeah,
that makes a ton of sense to me. I think it also like means right, like if we imagine that there's two different people that are writing an eval, whatever they bring to the table is going to be codified into the evaluation system and then just scaled out by these systems. So that also means if you have a strong opinion of how you want these systems to behave, then you're able to steer it in like the training and in the eval sets, which in my opinion like creates the opportunity for, we may have 2, 3, 4, 10 companies in the exact same space delivering quite different experiences, partly because it's like the opinion that's being expressed through that. And I'm hopeful that also enables like more opinions to be expressed than we had before, which then means some opinions that are, let's just say like more holistic, may actually have a chance to like win, or at least with some percentage of the market, which could be really beneficial.
Do you feel like, I mean, we're seeing that sort of in coding, but not really. I feel like Claude is really winning just from like production quality and, I like that. Yeah, ideally. I feel like there's actually a lot of like the simulation of what's going to happen tends to be quite positive in terms of just like net higher like quality, cheaper like access to like very high quality outputs. It's almost like everything has traditional. Yeah, it's like I'm quite like optimistic about this process.
Yeah, so like it's more about what you're working on. What is your hope for like what happens either for the clinical folks here, or like how this changes medicine, or like what is the really the mission and vision there that you've got for it? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, like you were just mentioning for coding, the primary interface is language. And because now that all the agents are we're communicating in language and a lot of the outputs are compounding in terms of its value, I think behavioral health or inner work has the exact same interface. Like language is how we understand ourselves and how we communicate. And so my view is like AI can actually facilitate or increase connection and like increase the fidelity of our connections in terms of like knowing what's happening in relationship dynamics, but also like our relationship with ourselves. But like self-inquiry is such a huge place. Like it's like very multifactorial. There's a lot of different like theories and different approaches, that the way that I'm sort of like thinking about it is through a much more structured like clinical setting, where currently, you know, you kind of go into a clinical environment and you're just giving, you know, somebody your kind of like snapshot of what's going on with your life. And so currently we're doing a lot of ingestion of like the actual conversation that happens between the clinician and the patient. You could imagine that like once people get used to that data being part of the processing to like understand what's going on with that person's life, we're also ingesting like, you know, forms that the caretakers are doing. Like that pipeline for the LLM is mimicking the current clinical situation where, you know, you're getting your caretakers, your own view, and then your medical records. We're gonna have like the human AI like through apps or just like LLMs right now, where someone's just talking about their inner world. It like there will be a point where AI can handle complexity of not just the medical output, but also the person's like inquiry with AI, and whether that could like facilitate a more holistic understanding of that person. And so I think that person should own all of those records and have a way to kind of like, I guess, piece all of that together into like a knowledge system that is unique to that person. So we're like just focused on clinical output because there's a lot of like accuracy and like, I guess like credibility, just like making sure that the doctors are signing off like with some of the approaches that we're taking to take your intake conversation to like, I don't know, tests that we've done with like your cognition or whatever. It's like, just focusing on the institutional side first. But I think that like the way that, all of this data that's being proliferated by people talking to their LLMs right now, like I think there's a lot of value of trying to parse some understanding there. Like there are certain patterns that you might see longitudinally that like not even your therapist or your coach might understand, and like that data definitely belongs to you. It's a new pattern, and you can like apply different frameworks to that. And that also just becomes like one facet of you, like the AI human generated psyche. And it's like, what does like therapy look like when we have that piece of information as well? I think that right now, like there's like AI therapy or like AI inquiry, and then there's like the traditional world. I think at some point there will be a merge of that. But that's like long term.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, but I also really dig like starting with like, what's the best in class today, like clinically, and where's like the safety guardrail in place. Plus, how do you then enable people to maintain that clinical safety and rigor with like the sovereignty of having their own kind of custodianship of this data and this knowledge, and like their own ability to do this self-inquiry. That's super noble. I dig that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a fun challenge to work on, I think, for sure. What's your takeaway in all your experiments right now, building AI agents? Like for other people, they're also just trying out different things, like just like any...
Fun question. I think there's like super tactical stuff where I'm realizing like just pick a thing and get like just work with it and get better. Like it doesn't matter if it's Cursor, Claude, Codex, whatever, just roll with it and just make it work for you. I think I'm learning that, and I'm getting like Claude Code. That's my kind of choice right now, dialed in for myself pretty well. The second thing I think is like I'm realizing like, look, if anything can be built, I think it's much more important to care about what you're building. And that's part of what I'm seeing with even now, like NPC Camp launched it, great, like what's next? I could go super deep on it and there could be like a business there, but to me it's like it's important to be clear, like this is one exploration of like one thing, and I'll keep it out there for the world to use, but like there's like a bigger vision that I'm pursuing, and I think it's like important to continue to remind myself of that. And I feel like that's probably I've had this conversation with a couple of their founder friends too, of just like, one life, like what are we doing? And I think that's now more than ever, I think that's like a good thing to realize in. Yeah,
for sure. And I also just like I don't know for sure, but I just have a feeling that like all these are just sandboxes to build you at the end of the day.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I feel like there's definitely like a part of me that's reflected in each one, and like I'm refining my own taste and like preference for how to do these things too. So I'm enjoying it. If anything, it feels like a story for another time, but I could see a world where like software goes the way of a video, where essentially anybody can create software and anybody can distribute software. And as a result, some software businesses could actually look much more like a YouTube creator business, where you have multiple channels, there's like a production team, you're creating things out there, but it's like a much more regular cadence and you're known for a certain type of content. And it just happens that a lot of the content is now created via code and delivered via software. And working on a couple of different projects where as these things are evolving is helping me kind of have some perspectives on how this may play out.
That's fascinating. I think wellness as an industry is also picking up.
Oh, for sure.
And so there's clearly like an appetite for people to go deeper, or at least for me, but I also see with my friends, like self-discovery and healing and like self-care. And I think that it's not accidental those two industries are exploding at the same time, because it does mean that like when you have more tools to express yourself, it is also like generally healthier. I feel like I need to like connect that back, but just like being able to express different parts of ourselves is like a sign of health versus like repressing a lot of things in order to be able to do one thing. I think that ideally it's almost like the creator economy, like that enabled everyone to make videos and therefore people just like focus on their niche. I think if everybody can generate software, there are more parts of themselves that can be expressed. It doesn't have to be one thing. Like, it doesn't have to be NBC Camp, there'd be all these different things. And it's just like, actually lowers the cost of builds and so increases the variability. So I think even the software or venture capital might look very different. Institutional infrastructure build. And then there's also just like apps that like work for one specific sector. Maybe it's a lifestyle business or whatever. Right?
For a couple people.
Yeah. And it works just as fine.
Yeah, I definitely see something like that happening. I think it's just good for the world if more people make weird stuff. And we all just like more weirdos, weird stuff.
I agree. Cool. I mean, with that, I think this is like pretty
that's
good.
The pod.
Yeah, that's the pod.